So I think it's about time that I start sharing my testimony with boldness. And this is something the Lord has been telling me to do more and more for a while now. And I have done it, but it's been really hard for me to get through it without crying. And recently, I was able to do it. I was able to share my testimony with somebody without crying. And part of the reason is because I struggled so much with shame and condemnation. Like, I was saved last April, and this entire time I've just been struggling with shame and condemnation. So growing up, I grew up in a really religious family. I grew up mostly with my grandparents. Spanish was my first language because they didn't speak much English. And I ended up developing English more because of school and everything like that. But at home, I mostly spoke Spanish. My parents were in and out of the picture. My mom was more in than my dad was, but they both had a lot going on. My dad was an addict, and my mom had a lot going on mentally. So I spent most of my time with my grandparents, and my grandparents would take us to church when I was little. I'm not going to single out my grandparents or like specific people in my family because it was multiple people in my family that would do this. But growing up, they would be religious to the point where they wouldn't just tell me like everything's demonic. They would look at me when I was a little girl and they'll tell me, you're demonic, you have demons, you're cursed, like things like that. And growing up, I just remember being terrified of the dark. Like, I was so scared of sleeping by myself, sleeping in the dark, and they'd get mad at me for it. But I was terrified of all of these things that they were telling me, and that's kind of like the perception of Christianity that I got, that if I don't behave and if I'm not good enough, that I have demons or demons are going to get me and all these things, and that's how I grew up. So growing up, I was encountering all different kinds of abuse in and out of my family. I was physically, verbally, emotionally, mentally, and sexually abused throughout my life. I remember the first time I thought of being unalived was when I was 6 or 7 years old. I was getting beat to the point where I was a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and I didn't cry anymore. Like, I was numb, and I just laid there, and I just hoped that I would end it all. Like, it would just all end. And I didn't even know what suicide was. So I refused, and I stopped going to church at, I think, around 12 years old. I started getting really fed up with things. I obviously was struggling with depression, anxiety. But as I got older, I started experimenting more with drugs, not just weed. I experimented with a lot of different things, a lot of psychedelics as well. And I just remember just changing over time, because when I was younger, I was the type of person, like, you could do anything to me and I would end up comforting you. And I just started changing. I started putting up walls. I started hardening my heart. And I think things really started changing for me when my dad started passing away. I think I was about 22, 23 years old. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was the year before I got saved, so I think I was 23 years old. And I remember I would work one week and I would take off the other week just to go visit him in New Jersey and be with him in his final moments. And it was a really slow and painful death. It was really hard to watch. And during that time, I was having a hard time keeping up with money, and I started selling explicit content of myself to men. And for me, it was just one of those things, like, I genuinely did not care, or I told myself I didn't care, because I was getting sexualized anyway. Like, I was getting sexualized so much, I was like, I might as well charge for it, you know? And that was a slippery slope. I ended up, even after my dad passed, I ended up working in sports bars and places like that, dressing practically half naked. And even in bartending and stuff, like the places that I would work at, even if I didn't have to dress like that, they would be entertaining men. I started getting deeper into witchcraft. I started praying to false idols. Eventually, I left one of my more revealing jobs because I ended up getting engaged, and I was just having all of these blessings, all of these counterfeit blessings just fall on my lap as I practiced manifesting and all of these things. And eventually, I just hit rock bottom. I was experiencing things I have never experienced before. I was behaving in ways I haven't behaved in my entire life, and I had no control. I was doing things I didn't even want to do. I was a slave to my sin. It was terrible. I was terrified of myself. I was at the very end, and I just remember scrolling through TikTok and trying to make sense of everything, and all I kept thinking was, I'd never been this far from Jesus before. I've never been this far gone before. And this verse came up on TikTok. It was an abbreviated version of this verse from Jeremiah, and it just said, I never quit loving you. I was just sitting there, covered in all of my sin and shame, and realizing that Jesus never quit loving me. And I bought a Bible because I was like, maybe Christianity isn't everything that I thought it was. And I opened to the book of Proverbs, and it became alive to me. I started reading the Bible 12 to 14 hours a day because at that time I didn't have a job anymore. And I wouldn't know what fasting was, but I would fast accidentally because I was just so hungry for the word of God, and he was renewing my mind, and I started healing. But in healing, it was almost like I would hit a wall because I was surrendering everything to him except one thing. The Lord told me to leave the relationship that I was in. We weren't doing anything sexual anymore because I told him I wanted to wait till marriage when I encountered the Lord. But the Lord wanted me to leave this relationship, and I was holding on to it. But the day that I finally left, the day that I finally surrendered that last thing, was the day that I was delivered. I remember breaking up with my ex in the car, and he literally told me, you're glowing. I went from having multiple panic attacks a day. I went from being completely out of my mind to completely healed in an instant. Everything broke off of me the moment I fully surrendered to Jesus. And my ex, in that moment of me breaking up with him, literally told me, you are glowing.